Good morning. If you would, take out a Bible. Maybe you've got it on your phone or something. Take that app out, open it up now, because we're going to be using your Bible this morning in the sermon. We are doing a series on the parables of Jesus. So we've been looking at some of the parables. We're not able to look at all of them. I think that, what did we say? There are like 38 parables. And we're not going to do 38 of them. So we're getting toward the end of our parables, but we'll still a few more. Today we're going to look at a parable that is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, right? And this one today is the parable of the new wine into old wineskins. It is found in 3 of the Gospels, the Synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's not found in John. John doesn't have any parables in John, sorry. But you'd know that if you were in Doc and Dale's class or you'd done any of our studies in the small group on the Gospels, because I did Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and now I'm in Acts. So this is an interesting parable. It's a story about the living, fermenting gospel that Jesus brought. That can't be contained in the old ways of doing things. It can't be contained in that. It grows and it will burst, and all of the wine will be lost. So today I've got a couple of wines. No, I didn't bring any wineskins up here. I am aware of different contraptions that people use to carry wine. You know, several thousand years ago, people wouldn't put that into a plastic bag. You know, now to get into a concert, people try to sneak contraptions in, and they've got things that you can wear underneath your clothes that have wine or whatever you want in it, and you can pull out a little tube. And did you know that? Were you aware of it? That's just what I wanted to do, be in a hot, sweaty concert and drink body temperature wine. And you know, no problem. We could have handed out wine and talked about wine today, but with all of the trouble that brings, in just stand around and watch people, it destroys lives. We're not talking about, this is not an encouragement to go home and make wine with wineskins and clean an animal and turn it inside out and put wine in it and then drink hairy wine for the next 6 years. That does not even sound good. But Jesus uses that story to try to teach us something, what? Spiritual. And by the way, this is a very complicated parable. It's not just immediately, you don't read it and go, oh yeah, that's pretty simple. Some of the parables that Jesus told, the people that he told it to, they were left standing around like, what does that mean? And they would even ask him, what is the meaning of that parable that you just told? And then Jesus would break down that parable. He does not do that here. So we're left to determine what this parable means to us just at face value. So today we're going to unpack that and take a really close look at this parable about the kingdom, that the kingdom is sufficient to all the former things that came along, all the Old Testament things, and that grace is preferred. Jesus' offer of grace is certainly to be preferred over the Old Testament obedience to the law and following the Old Testament law. This parable is going to tell us 3 very practical lessons for Christian living. So I'm excited to find out what those are, right? Maybe you are too. Let's go ahead and look at our text. Our text is in Luke chapter 5, verses 33 through 39. It's actually got kind of 2 parables in it. One is about sewing a patch on new clothes. If you sew or on old clothes. If you sew a new patch onto old clothes and then wash it or wear it, it's going to rip away. And in the same manner, the heart of this parable, Jesus says that if you put new wine into old wineskins that have lost their elasticity, elasticity, that will grow and ferment and explode. It will blow out and all the wine will be lost and ruined. So let's look at our text at that parable of the new wine in old wineskins in Luke chapter 5, verses 33 through 39. And they said to him, John's disciples often fast and pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours go on eating and drinking. And Jesus answered, can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? But a time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and in those days they will fast. And then he told them this parable. No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new won't match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, and the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, the new wine must be poured into new wineskins. No one, after drinking old wine, wants the new, for they all say, the old is better. The old is better. So what are the lessons that we can learn from this parable of pouring new wine into old wineskins? What's a lesson that holding it? We have to go dig a little bit and look at this, because Matthew, the tax collector, has just been called to follow Jesus. And Jesus is gathered with him and the other disciples, and they're enjoying each other's company, and they're celebrating. And that obviously was different from what a lot of people were doing. They were not celebrating. They were fasting, John's disciples, and also the Pharisees. They were having regular fasts. So one of the first lessons I think that we can learn from this parable is don't be so quick to judge other people. The Pharisees were quick to judge Jesus and the disciples for eating when they were fasting and praying. Hey, why can't Jesus be as religious as the rest of us? That's a weird thing, right? So don't be quick to judge other people. I want to talk to you about a fast just for a minute, because maybe that's an unfamiliar term to you. A fast is not so that you can lose a little bit of weight, right? I'm going to go without a meal here, 2 meals. I'm going to go without 3 meals. I'm going to skip a meal. A fast is not so you can lose weight or so that you can get blood work done. I went to the doctor one time, and I had drank lemonade all through the night and eaten little fruit snacks all through the evening, and had my blood work done the next day. And then a couple weeks later, I went to the doctor, and she said, "You're pre-diabetic." And I said, "I am." And she said, "Well, either that or you ate something in the middle of the night." And I said, "Oh, I actually did." She said, "Well, that messed up that blood work." So they want you to fast so that your blood work. See, that's not a biblical fast. So just so we understand, a biblical fast is not eating so that we can rein in the desires of the flesh and subdue them. And maybe the time that we would spend preparing a meal and eating a meal, we would instead spend that time with God. And He would become our sustenance, our food. You know, Jesus even said, "I have food that you don't know anything about." He provides that spiritual food. And a fast is spending time with God and feeding on Him spiritually. It's not about losing weight or going to the doctor the next day. That's just a medical fast. That's not a spiritual fast. And I think that fasting is something that Christians ought to be aware of and do, but I don't think that it's something that we ought to compare with each other. We did in high school. Have you ever done the fast for world hunger? You did that in high school? I did that in high school. So we met at the church, and everybody was going to go without eating, right? So what do? You pile up on food before you get to church, right? That's what I did. Let me just say that I am not recommending you do what I did for this fast, but it was a fast for world hunger, And they gathered up all the youth, and I was in the youth group at that time. I was in high school. And they took us to a basketball game in town, big basketball game. And I had a candy bar, and I had popcorn, and I had probably a couple Dr. Peppers, and probably ate all through that game, like a lot of the kids did that were in a fast. So let me just say something. You can't be forced to fast with others. And you can't go around telling other people that you're fasting. That kind of ruins the whole spiritual purpose of it. You're not bragging about it. If you're bragging about fasting, you're probably a Pharisee, like was questioning Jesus. They questioned Jesus as to whether or not he was being spiritual enough. And Jesus pointed out to him that, hey, right now is a time for celebrating because the bridegroom is here. Jesus was on earth, right? Remember when he told Martha and Mary, Mary, she wasn't as attentive to the meal. And Martha, she was working her tail off. And she was kind of upset that perfume was being brought out, and the disciples were kind of upset about the waste of that kind of thing. And Jesus pointed out, the poor you will always have with you, but not so with me. So there was a time of celebrating. Jesus, even in our parable, he even points to the fact that there's a time coming when Jesus won't be with them. They won't be celebrating. He won't be with us in the same way as he was physically with the disciples. And so instead of celebrating, we will be fasting. He says there's a time coming that we will fast. I think that it is very important to consider that the spiritual things that you do, whether they're fasting or praying or coming to church, shouldn't be done in a loud, ostentatious, or you make an announcement ahead of time. I'm fasting. Everybody, please take note of how spiritual I am. Don't be so quick to judge other people and condemn them. Be careful holding other people to the same high standards that you have. Because all of us are going to be held to God's high standards. You hold other people to the high standards that you live by, it kind of looks silly, okay? Not to you, because you look great, right? But to other people, they start to notice, maybe they're not doing this for the right reason. It's not a good motive. And when you look at other people and notice that they lack the same kind of spiritual sophistication that you have, they lack the devotion that you show in your life, well, stop doing that. There was a name for that. Nobody made you God's hall monitor. In school, somebody, when the teacher left the room, somebody was always in charge of reporting if you were talking or doing something or got out of your seat, which I did quite often. And at the recess, after every time you had a hall monitor, that hall monitor, everybody pummeled that kid, right? For telling on them and for being the hall monitor. You are not God's hall monitor. You don't have to report to other people how bad they are or even monitor other people. You don't have to do that. In Matthew chapter 7, a familiar passage, Matthew chapter 7, verse 3, you've probably heard this before. You could read the longer version of it if you'd like. But Jesus says, "Why do you look at a speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye?" So how can you really help somebody else if you've got something in your eye? You really can't help anybody else. And if your thing is like a log sticking out of your eye and the other person has like a little speck in their eye, you need to pay attention to your own life. We have to discern right from wrong. And I'm not suggesting that we be tolerant of sin in other people's lives, but here are 3 simple tricks to become less judgmental of other people. So if I were you, I would write all 3 of these down, okay? Just saying. 3 simple tricks to be less judgmental of other people. Not tolerant of sin, but less judgmental of other people. First of all, mind your own business, okay? I realize that we care about one another and we want to hold one another accountable. I realize that. I agree with you, right? But I got a lot of things going on in my life before I start trying to correct other people that I want to correct in my own life. See, I want to correct my own life first, then I could help guide other people. So be busy. My goodness, it doesn't take you a week to get in line. It does me. I spend quite a bit of time trying to get my own self lined out. I don't have a whole lot of time to come follow you around and line your life out. So one good way that we could be less judgmental of one another is to pay attention to our own spiritual health, and then maybe we'll have a little bit that we can provide to help others. But mind your own business and focus on yourself and your own spiritual growth before you try leading somebody else. Secondly, extend mercy and grace to other people who are caught up in sin. It's not a funny thing. In fact, it's kind of sad. Maybe if we extended grace and mercy, we want grace and mercy extended to us, right? Well, maybe if we extended grace and mercy to other people, we would become a little bit less judgmental. And then lastly, of course, is to always celebrate God's forgiveness and His grace and His mercy. Always celebrate that in your life. Celebrate that you've been forgiven. Celebrate that others have been transformed and forgiven, that their entire life has been changed. Celebrate that. Every day, celebrate God's mercy and His grace and His forgiveness. You could become a little less judgmental of others, and it wouldn't hurt one bit. Some people, by looking at other people's lives and determining how spiritual they are, someone who doesn't appear to be very righteous may in fact be right before God. And somebody who appears very righteous may in fact not have it all together. You and I can't tell these things. And we would do so much better if we would not be so quick to judge others. According to our parable that we're looking at, being judgmental, specifically being judgmental of Jesus, or being hypercritical of other people, being God's hall monitor, will in fact fill an old wineskin to the point of its bursting. I tried this at home and I couldn't pop a balloon by blowing it up. I'm sorry. So I'm not going to do that. Imagine the big loud noise that would make if I had enough air in me to actually blow that up and pop that. Judging other people will burst that wineskin. It will ruin your day. It will ruin your wine. Secondly, though, another very important thing that we can learn from this parable is that you shouldn't allow routine to rule your life. Just going through the motions. I like the old methods and the proven methods. And even Jesus says that the old wine is better than new wine. They're actually two different words in Greek. One is sweet wine and one is just wine. And that refers to some wine hasn't finished the fermentation process. Not until the 1800s with Welch's grape juice do we have the opportunity to pasteurize grape juice. Other times it just all fermented. Grape juice. It would just ferment, and there was no way of stopping that. I know sometimes we take communion, at communion time we think, oh, wow, that must have sat out for a while. Well, it's just turned. It's probably turned into vinegar. It's not turning into wine. Don't go buy grape juice and try to turn it into wine. That won't work. Jesus says that old wine is better. You want an aged wine, a wine that's been around for a while. You don't want Jeff's wine, right? Kathy knows what Jeff's wine is. Could you give me a lemonade? Stop whining. That's my one. The old wineskin made a good batch of wine, but it can't be reused over and over again. It just won't work. Wine that has been put in animal skins. By the way, in ancient Israel and Rome, biblical times, 2,000 years ago, they put wine into animal skins to ferment. I don't want to drink wine that I have to pick hairs out of or pieces of raw meat or fat or anything like that. It just doesn't sound good. I'm sure that if you were around 2,000 years ago, that would have been a fantastic thing for you to do. But not only did they ferment in skins, but they also transported wine in skins. And maybe you've seen some flasks made of like a skin or a leather. That's kind of a mock-up of what was present in the 2,000 years ago when Jesus is talking about putting wine in animal skins and sewing it shut and allowing the fermentation process to expand the skin. But if it's not elastic enough, if it's already been used and it's all dried out, then it's going to burst. Faith in Jesus can't be contained in your rituals. You can't go through rituals and expect your heart to be right before God. Our relationship with Jesus is a living, expanding relationship. It's fermenting. It's taking over every part of our lives. It's bubbling over, and it's fermenting in this new wineskin. I like old things. Old things are comfortable for me. I like old clothes. I have socks that are much older than many of, or maybe some of you who are here, maybe about 20 years old. I have socks that old. Ties, I have ties that are older than I am. I like old things. And maybe you do too. But be very cautious with what I'm about to tell you. Old rituals and going through the motion won't cut it. It'll ferment and explode that wineskin. It'll ruin your new wine. I like old pews. They're much more comfortable to lay in than these chairs when you're sleeping through a sermon. I like the old horse and buggy. Well, the very first church that I ever preached at when I was in high school, it was probably 1980. No, I was out of high school. It was probably 1982. I was in college. And it was an old-timey church. They didn't have an air conditioner. In the summertime, they opened up all the windows. Men sat on one side of the church, women sat on the other side of the church, which was weird, right? I don't remember where Kathy sat, but it wasn't at the piano. You know those old days, the horse and buggy days. I like those days. People said, if we don't come to church next week, it's because the creek is out. And they really couldn't come to church if the creek was full. I like the old songs, right? Oh, give me the old songs, the old time. Oh, they have so much meaning to them, right? Pretty songs. I like the old funeral fans. Who remembers those? The funeral printed up the fans that we're using here today to cool you off. And that's all you've got. I like the old time fancy clothes, right? The gloves, the hats, the scarves that people would wear to church. Oh, those were the good old days. I like the old preaching, where they'd go for 2 or 3 or 4 hours. Really? Well, if it was good enough for Paul, it's good enough for me, right? I like the old things, but let's be fair. I like new conveniences also. I like the fact that I can carry my library around on my phone pretty much. If my phone goes dead, I'm in trouble. Or if the EMF takes out all electronics, I'm in trouble. But I know where to find a Bible. I can find my way through that. I like some of the new things. I like technology. I like comfortable chairs like we have here. Some of you have a handle on the side of your chair that will put your footrest out. Did you know that? Are you looking for that handle now? Don't. It's not there. I like being able to drive a car to church rather than have to walk or ride in a horse and buggy. I like the new songs. They're very, very lively, and they have a deep truth to them, like the hymns did, and very spiritual songs. I love the new songs. They're great. I like being in air conditioning and not have to have a funeral fan to fan me and keep me cool in church. I like comfortable clothing. I kind of enjoy not having a tie that's choking me while I'm trying to preach and sweating all over all of my clothes. I like that. I enjoy that. Comfortable clothes. Jesus wore sandals and a robe, right? At least I don't have a robe on. I like sermons that you can kind of understand and connect with and know, hey, this week, maybe I could try that. I like those kinds of sermons, even if they're not an hour long, sermons that you stay awake for. We have to expand our faith beyond ritual and routine. Are your devotions or your prayer life or your worship stale and brittle like an old animal skin? Are they dry and ready to burst? Do you have trouble eliminating things that are rote or routine that you do? You know what happens if you pray every night just before you fall asleep? You fall asleep praying, right? If that's your routine, you're falling asleep praying, which is, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but stay awake and talk to God for a while. You don't have to just talk to God when you're nodding off. You can talk to God during the day, like first thing in the morning, or all throughout the day. Or your whole life could be a conversation of prayer with God. And those are the real simple prayers. God, don't let that light turn red. Oh, God, don't let that cop see me. Oh, God, help me today. God, help me with this health. Just the short prayers that aren't real eloquent. Yeah, I know. It sounds really good when somebody's got a real beefy prayer, right? And they've got the part of the Lord's Prayer. They've got part of the Old Testament. They're quoting scriptures back and forth. Those sound really eloquent. But you know what? God looks at our heart. Let's make sure that we're right before Him. He's not counting all the eloquent words that you use in a prayer to Him. He just wants to talk. He loves us, and we should interact with Him in a way that indicates that we love Him. Eliminate all of those rituals from your life. Evaluate your spiritual condition right now. It's not going to hurt. Evaluate your spiritual condition. What habits do you have that your heart isn't fully engaged in? Make your faith new and vibrant. Remove all the ritual and the routine and engage in a real relationship, a new and fresh relationship that He's wanting to bring in your life. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 22 and 20 through 24 say, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is corrupted by its deceitful desires, and to be made new in the attitude of your mind, and to put on one's new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. We've got a new attitude. We've got a new way of thinking that we have to put on. And we're going to have to make some room for that new thinking by getting rid of the ritual and the routine that we're stuck in. Hey, being stuck in a routine and in a rut, being in a ritual is like an old wineskin. And eventually, enough fermentation takes place, and it's going to burst. Okay, I can't do it. I really can't do it. I can't. It would be a good illustration, but I just can't. I really can't do it. So don't let routine that you get into dominate and rule your life. Have a real connection with Jesus, a real one-on-one. And lastly, the last lesson that we can learn from this parable is don't get in the way of the gospel. Oh man, don't go back to the old method of law and obedience to it, whether it's the 10 Commandments or the 750 or the 1,352. I'm trying to think of the midrash, because if you add the midrash into that, you're going to have a lot more other laws and things to follow. Sin is no longer being rolled back in the Old Testament. Every priest would stand day after day. He'd perform the same religious duties again and again. He'd offer the same sacrifices, which can never take away sin. But when this high priest, Jesus, when he came, he made one sacrifice for all time and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Don't go back to that old method. Who would want to go back to the old way? The old way needed to be replaced with the new. And don't get in the way of the life-giving gospel. The old ways are great. The old agreement was good. The old dietary laws were fantastic. The old sacrifices were good. But they're gone. They're done. They've been replaced. And that new fermentation has expanded, and that old can't hold it in anymore. Mercy comes over the strict law. Heart would replace the ritual obedience. Use the new methods. You know, our own churches back. I wasn't around in the 1800s. I hope that you realize that. But our churches in the 1800s were vibrant. And they thought about new things. They tried new things all the time. And I imagine some old person, probably, my age, was standing around and said, "We tried that before, and it's not going to work. I'll see to it that it doesn't work." All the old ways have now been replaced by Jesus' blood. And we shouldn't want to go back to the old ways of doing things. The Pharisees did that. The Judaizers that Paul addressed in some of his letters, the Judaizers did that. They embraced the old covenant. And let me tell you something about the old covenant. It wasn't very compassionate. Hey, you remember, this is another parable, the parable of the Good Samaritan. We kind of had some sermons on the Good Samaritan, so we didn't pick that parable to do. But you remember the parable of the Good Samaritan? So there were religious leaders who were on their way to church, but they couldn't stop and help somebody. They drove right past the guy with the flat tire. They drove right past the homeless person on the corner that needed their help. They drove right past somebody that was hungry. They drove right past somebody that had some kind of need. And they got to church on time, but they never met that need. Maybe they ignored the need. Just like in the story of the Good Samaritan, the religious leaders, the priest and the Levite crossed on the road on the other side so they didn't have to be involved in somebody's life. I'm telling you, get involved in other people's lives and serve them. And if you miss a church service because of it, we're going to understand. There's been a big push. I think it may be the Reformed Baptists or some group lately about Sabbath observation and observing the Sabbath day. If you have a thermostat at your house, if you got into a car to come to church, you were breaking what you would consider the Sabbath. I don't know why people want to return to the law. I don't know why people would return to a system of sacrifice or a system of obedience to an endless number of rules now that grace is here. Now that God's brought this new grace to us. Don't let anybody judge you about things like that and obedience to things like that. Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, Paul says, "Therefore do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. These are the shadows of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. Jesus brought grace. Enjoy that. Embrace that. He brought mercy. Why would you want to go back to the Old Testament and the obedience to it? Why would you want to dip your foot into the pool of legalism, knowing that it's only going to point out what you do wrong? We can't allow legalism to creep in and rule these 4 areas of our life. Our prayer life, our devotional life. Did you do your devotion yet this morning? Our devotional life, our pursuit of godliness, and our witness. We can't allow routine and ritual to creep into those areas. If we get in the way of the gospel, if your faith is becoming dry and brittle, it is about to do what? It is about to burst. That hurt. That hurt. That really hurt. It will burst and ruin the new wine in your life. What is this new wine? So now that we've done this parable and we've seen that Jesus has some things to teach us in that parable, maybe they're a little difficult to learn or hard to understand or accept, but they are found in 3 of the 4 Gospels, this parable about the new wine. What is your faith like? Is it like a dry, old skin that somebody's trying to pour new, fermenting wine into? It's just going to bust. It's something all of us should think about today, how we could be a little less judgmental maybe of other people and mind our own faith. Take care of our own spiritual life before we try to take care of somebody else's spiritual life. Maybe ritual has brought you here today, and all that's been engaged is your feet. Your mind hasn't been into worship. Maybe you're just going through the motions. Maybe you haven't made a way for grace in your life and in the lives of others. If you're trying to fit your relationship with Jesus into legalism and the law, your wineskin is about to burst. Make room for God's mercy and His grace in your life. Let's pray. God, we're grateful for the cross and for the mercy that we find there. Help us, God, not to store our faith into something that's dry and filled with ritual and routine, but to live an exciting, fermenting, challenging life that you've brought us through Jesus. Lord, if there are any people that need to make decisions for you, maybe they need to surrender more, or maybe they need to turn their lives over initially to you and follow you. Lord, may this be the day that we would make those decisions before it's too late. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen.